the little book. And I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. And he had in his hand a little book open. And he set his right foot on the sea, and his left foot on the earth, and cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roareth. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices. And when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write. And I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered, and write them not. And the angel, which I saw stand upon the sea and upon the earth, lifted up his hand to heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven, and the things that therein are, and the earth, and the things that therein are, and the sea, and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer. But in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as he hath declared to his servants the prophets. And the voice which I heard from heaven spake unto me again, and said, Go and take the little book, which is open in the hand of the angel, which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. And I went unto the angel, and said unto him, Give me the little book. And he said unto me, Take it, and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall he in thy mouth sweet as honey. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand, and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey. And as soon as I had eaten it, my belly was bitter. And he said unto me, Thou must prophesy again before many peoples, and nations, and tongues, and kings. Who this mighty angel is we do not know unless he be Christ himself. In the Old Testament the Son of God was called the angel of the Lord, Ex. 3:2-18. And as we are now in that part of the book of Revelation that deals mainly with Israel, it is nothing less than what we should expect to hear. Christ spoken of as a mighty angel. Then the description of this mighty angel seems to point to the same person that John saw standing amid the lampstands in chapter 1, 12-16, or Christ himself. The angel was clothed in a cloud, there was a rainbow upon his head, his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. No mere angel was ever before or since described in the scriptures as appearing like that. Then he is described as crying with a loud voice, as a lion roareth, and Christ is spoken of in this book, Rev. 5-5, as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and in the chapter that follows this the same mighty angel speaks of the 2 witnesses as my witnesses, which is further indisputable evidence that this mighty angel is no other than Christ himself. This interpretation makes clear what follows. For when this mighty angel places his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot on the earth, and swears that there shall be time no longer, or no longer delay, margin, it is Christ taking formal possession of the earth and sea, and declaring that there shall be no longer delay in dispossessing the false claimant Satan. When the mighty angel cried with a loud voice, John heard 7 thunders utter their voices. These thunders spoke, for John heard what they said, and as he had been commanded to write what he should see and hear, he proceeded to write what the voices of the 7 thunders uttered, but he was told to seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered, and write them not. What they said has never as yet been revealed, but doubtless will be when the time comes to make the revelation. John was then told to go, take the little book, which is open in the hand of the angel, which standeth upon the sea and upon the earth. John was at this time back again on the earth. And when John took the little book, the angel said to him, Take and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, and it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. And when John had eaten the book, it was as the angel had said, sweet to his mouth and bitter to his stomach. What was this little book? Some claim that it was the 7-sealed book, now open, and therefore the title deed to the earth, and that the mighty angel held it in his hand, as he stood with 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the earth, as his authority for claiming possession. But the angel does not make that use of it, and if it were his title deed to the earth, it seems a strange procedure for him to give it to John to eat. Then it is described as a little book, as if its contents were small. In that respect, it stands in marked contrast with the seven-sealed book, whose numerous seals, and the time taken to break them, imply that it was of considerable size. Then the effect upon John of the eating of the little book seems to indicate that it was more than a title deed. For it contained matter that when John first ate it, glanced over it, was sweet as honey to his mouth, but when he had thoroughly digested its contents was bitter to his belly. In other words, the little book contained matter connected with John's work as a prophet, for the angel immediately said to him, "Thou must prophesy again before many peoples, and nations, and tongues, and kings," which for aught we know John did. This little book, here open, is probably the book that Daniel was told to seal up. Dan. 12-4-9. That book contained things that were not to be revealed until the time of the end. Not the end of time, but the end of the times of the Gentiles, which synchronizes with the last half of Daniel's 70th week, and therefore with the Great Tribulation period. If this supposition be true, then the little book was a foreview of the things that are to befall Daniel's people in the last half of Daniel's 70th week. The effect on John of reading the little book seems to confirm this view, for as he read of the deliverances that were to come to his people, and of the final victory of the Lamb, and the setting up of the kingdom, the book was as sweet as honey to his taste. But when he meditated upon the awful sufferings that would come upon the world, and upon the Jews, under the reign of the beast, Antichrist, and during the pouring out of the vials, it was bitterness to his soul. The finished mystery. When the seventh trumpet angel shall begin to sound, the mystery of God shall be finished. This is not the mystery of the church, for that was finished by the taking out of the church in chapter 4. That mystery was unknown to the prophets. The mystery of God is the mystery of why God permitted Satan to cause the fall of man, and thus bring sin and misery and death into the world. To the Old Testament prophets God revealed the fact that in his own good time he would make clear this mystery, and when the seventh trumpet, that includes all that happens from chapter 11-15, sounds, the mystery of God will be finished, for then the mystery of iniquity, Antichrist 2. Thess. 2, 6-10, will be revealed, in whom Satan will incarnate himself after he is cast out of heaven, and in his destruction, and the binding of Satan, and the setting up of the millennial kingdom of Christ, shall be fulfilled the promises to the prophets, that peace and righteousness shall reign on the earth. And when, as the result of the renovation of the earth by fire, the redeemed human race shall take up its abode upon a redeemed and restored earth, and sin and rebellion shall forever be destroyed, the mystery of God, or why sin was permitted to wreck this world, will be finished. The two witnesses, Rev. 11, 1-14. And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court, which is without the temple, leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees, and the two candlesticks, standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues, as often as they will. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them, and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these two prophets tormented them that dwelt on the earth. And after 3 days and a half the Spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And the same hour was there a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell, and in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were affrighted, and gave glory to the God of heaven. The angel that told John to rise and measure the temple was the same mighty angel that handed him the little book to eat. And as they were both still on the earth, the temple that John was told to measure was the temple at Jerusalem. Not the temple of Herod, for that had been destroyed over 25 years before by Titus in AD 70. This then must be a future temple that is to be built at Jerusalem. It is clear that there will be a temple at Jerusalem during the reign of Antichrist, for he shall sit in it and proclaim himself God. 2 Thess. 2, 3-4. And he shall cause the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, Dan. 9:27, probably the image of the beast, to be set up in the holy place. Matt. 24:15. This will not be the millennial temple described by Ezekiel, Ez. 4-1, 42-20, for that will be built at Shiloh, in the midst of the holy oblation, Ez. 48-8, 21. And not until after the physical changes that will take place at the return of Christ, Zech. 14-4, shall have changed the surface of the land of Palestine. The temple that the Jews will build on their return to Jerusalem will probably be destroyed by the earthquake that destroys the 10th part of the city, for that earthquake will synchronize with the great earthquake that shall occur at the breaking of the 7th seal, the sounding of the 7th trumpet, and the pouring out of the 7th vial. Reverend 8-5, 11-19, 16-18. John was told to measure only the temple proper, and to leave out the court that surrounded it. The temple of Herod had 4 courts: the court of the priests, the court of Israel, the court of the women, and the court of the Gentiles. The tabernacle had but 1 court, while Solomon's temple had 2, the court of the priests, and the court of the Gentiles. As the court of this new temple, as well as the holy city, Jerusalem, is to be trodden under foot of the Gentiles for 42 months, or 3.5 years, this period must refer to the last half of the 70th week, after Antichrist breaks his covenant with the Jews and desecrates the temple, for Jerusalem must be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Luke chapter 21 verse 24, and that will not end until the battle of Armageddon. After the mighty angel had given John instructions as to measuring the temple, he said, And I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days. As 1,260 days are equal to 42 months of 30 days each, or to 3.5 years, then the time when these 2 witnesses are to prophesy must correspond with the last half of the week, or the time of the Great Tribulation. Who are these 2 witnesses? They are men, not systems, or churches, or a body of witnesses, for they prophesy and are clothed in sackcloth, neither of which can be said of other than persons, and there are 2 of them. It is very easy to identify them. They have power to shut heaven that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. This can refer to no other than Elijah, who had power in the days of King Ahab to shut up the heavens for the space of 3 years and 6 months. 1 Kings chapter 17 verse 1. Luke chapter 4 verse 25. James chapter 5 verse 17. And this is the same length of time, 42 months, or 1260 days, or 3.5 years, that these 2 witnesses are to prophesy. Then we know that Elijah was translated, and did not see death, that he might come back before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, for the purpose of turning the heart of the children to their fathers, and this is the purpose of the prophesying of these 2 witnesses. Mal. 4, 5-6. It is clear from the time that the prophet Malachi said that Elijah would come again, just before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, that this prophecy was not fulfilled in John the Baptist. He announced the first coming of Christ, but no great and dreadful day of the Lord followed. That event is yet future, and follows the testimony of these 2 witnesses. When the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to John to ask him, Who art thou? He confessed, I am not the Christ. And they asked him, What then? Art thou Elijah? And he said, I am not. It is clear from John's answers to these questions that he was not Elijah. When Gabriel announced to Zacharias the birth of John the Baptist, he said, He shall go before him, Christ, in the spirit and power of Elijah. That is, he will not be Elijah, but shall be like him in spirit and power. When John from his prison cell sent messengers to Jesus to ask him if he were the Christ, after Christ had dismissed those messengers, he said to the multitude of John, If you will receive it, this is Elijah which was for to come. Matt 11, 1-14. Jesus here simply affirms that John was Elijah if men would receive it. Not receive him, John, but receive it. What did Jesus mean by it? The context shows that Jesus was talking about the kingdom, verses 11 and 12, and if they had received the kingdom that John announced was at hand, then John, instead of being John, would have been Elijah come back. But because God foresaw that the Jews would not receive the kingdom, he could not send Elijah at that time, so he had to send a substitute with the spirit and power of Elijah in his place, so he sent John the Baptist. But you say, did not Jesus say to the disciples when they were coming down from the Mount of Transfiguration, where they had seen Elijah, Elias truly shall first come and restore all things? But I say unto you that Elias is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist. Matt 17, 11-13. Now whatever this may mean, it cannot contradict John's own declaration that he was not Elijah, or Christ's statement that if God had foreseen that the Jews would have received the kingdom, he would have sent Elijah instead of John. And Christ's statement in the above reference, that Elijah's purpose in coming is to restore all things, which John did not do, and Malachi's declaration that Elijah would not come until just before the great and dreadful day of the Lord, makes it clear that John the Baptist was not Elijah, and that Elijah is yet to come. It is clear then that one of the two witnesses will be Elijah, but who will be the other? Many claim that Moses will be the second witness, while some say he will be Enoch, because they say Moses being a resurrected person cannot die again, and the two witnesses are both to die. They claim that both Enoch and Elijah were caught up in their bodies, without dying, that they might come back again in their bodies and die. There is no scriptural ground for declaring that Moses cannot die again. Lazarus was raised from the dead and he died again, and the wicked dead shall be raised from the dead, and after judgment at the great white throne, they shall be sentenced to die again, which is the second death. Rev. 20, 12-15. It is said of these two witnesses that they have power 1. To shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. 2. And have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues, as often as they will. Now we know that Moses had power to turn water into blood, and to smite the earth with plagues, but we are not told that Enoch had such power. If we study carefully what shall happen during the period the two witnesses shall testify, which as we have seen will be the last half of the week, or 3.5 years, we shall see that the two witnesses can be no other than Moses and Elijah. It is probable that Elijah will shut up the heavens that there shall be no rain during the 3.5 years of their witnessing, for we read that there is to be a fire test, such as Elijah appointed on Mount Carmel in the days of King Ahab 1. Kings chapter 18 verses 17-40, and the contest will be between Elijah and the false prophet, and that the false prophet shall have power to do what the priests of Baal could not do, bring fire from heaven. Rev. 13:13. The crucial question on Mount Carmel was, who is God, Jehovah or Baal? In the days of Antichrist it will be, who is God, Jehovah or Antichrist? The test will be the power to bring down fire from heaven. As the false prophet will imitate the power of Elijah and bring down fire from heaven, the test will not be decisive. The true Israel of God, however, will acknowledge the claim of Jehovah, while the followers of the beast will continue to believe in him. But Elijah shall not be as fortunate as he was in the days of Ahab, for then he escaped the vengeance of Jezebel, but he will not be able to escape the vengeance of Antichrist, who will see to it that both he and Moses are slain. As the plagues that are to accompany the pouring out of the vials, are 4 of them similar to the plagues of Egypt, who more likely to bring them to pass than Moses? The evidence seems conclusive that the 2 witnesses will be Moses and Elijah. In passing, it is worth noting the title of these 2 men. The mighty angel, Christ calls them my 2 witnesses. This implies that witnessing was their business. And when we recall their witnessing on the Mount of Transfiguration, Matt 17:3, and that it was 2 men that witnessed to the women at the tomb that Jesus had risen, Luke chapter 24 verses 4-7, and that it was 2 men who stood by and witnessed to the disciples as Jesus ascended into heaven, Acts chapter 1 verses 10-11, and that in all 3 incidents the men were clothed in shining garments, it seems clear that Moses was resurrected and Elijah translated for the express office of witnesses. These 2 witnesses are called the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks, which stand before the God of the earth. For an explanation of this symbol, we must turn back to the Old Testament. The prophet Zechariah saw in a vision a golden candlestick, with a bowl upon the top of it, and the 7 lamps thereon, and 7 pipes to the 7 lamps, and 2 olive trees by it, one upon the right side of the bowl, and the other upon the left side thereof. And he turned to the angel that talked with him, and said, What are these 2 olive trees, upon the right side of the candlestick and upon the left side thereof? And he said, These are the 2 anointed ones that stand by the Lord of the whole earth. Zech 4:1-14. These 2 anointed ones were Zerubbabel the governor, and Joshua the high priest. Haggai chapter 1 verses 1-14. Zech 3-1, 4-6. They had been anointed by the Holy Spirit to rebuild and restore Jerusalem and the temple after the Babylonian captivity, against which Satan was raising up much opposition. Zech 3:1-7. What more appropriate type could have been used than this? Zerubbabel and Joshua are types of the 2 witnesses, whose work it will be to proclaim that the time has come to rebuild Jerusalem and re-establish the temple worship, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And they will have to do it in the face of the opposition of Satan, who at that time will have incarnated himself in the Antichrist. How beautifully this illustrates the fact that every type in the Scriptures has its antitype, and that the Old Testament enfolds and unfolds the New Testament, and that until the antitype appears, the plan and purpose of God remains unfulfilled and incomplete. These 2 witnesses are to prophesy for 1260 days, or 3.5 years, and for that length of time they are immune from death. For if any man attempt to hurt them, fire will proceed out of their mouths and devour their enemies. But when they have finished their testimony, they shall be overcome by the beast, Antichrist, who will make war against them, and shall kill them, and their dead bodies shall lie in the streets of Jerusalem, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt at that time, because the character of its inhabitants will resemble the character of the inhabitants of Sodom in the days of Lot, and the conduct of Israel in Egypt, Ezek 23, 3-4, 8, 19. For the space of 3 days and a half, and the people of all nationalities shall not suffer their dead bodies to be buried, and they shall rejoice over them, and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these 2 witnesses who tormented them by their that need their trade started. How foolish men are! They think that when they kill God's prophets they have destroyed his law and cannot be punished. But the people's rejoicing will be short-lived, for at the end of the 3.5 days the Spirit of life will re-enter the bodies of the 2 witnesses, and they shall stand upon their feet, and great fear shall be upon their enemies, and a voice from heaven will be heard saying, Come up hither, and they shall ascend up to heaven in a cloud as Christ himself ascended, and their enemies shall witness their ascent. They are first resurrected and then translated. The same hour of their ascension there will be a great earthquake that will destroy 1/10 part of the city of Jerusalem and 7,000 of its inhabitants, and the remainder of its inhabitants will turn to God from fright. But this repentance will be short-lived, like that of Pharaoh's. It must not be supposed that because this description of the 2 witnesses is given to John in the interval between the 6th and 7th trumpets, that the 2 witnesses testify only during that interval. The time is too short, for they testify for 1260 days, or 42 months. Their witnessing was still future when John was told about them, for the mighty angel said to John, I will give, showing that the two witnesses had not as yet appeared, for John did not see them. He simply recorded what the mighty angel told him about them. As we have seen, the period of their witnessing is during the last half of the week, and therefore they do not appear until the middle of the week. The second woe is past, and, behold, the third woe cometh quickly. Seventh trumpet, third woe, covers the rest of the week. Rev. 11:15-19. And the seventh angel sounded, and there were great voices in heaven, saying, The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders, which sat before God on their seats, fell upon their faces, and worshipped God, saying, We give thee thanks, O Lord God Almighty, which art and wast and art to come, because thou hast taken to thee thy great power, and hast reigned. And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead, that they should be judged, and that thou shouldest give reward unto thy servants the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth. And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament, and there were lightnings, and voices, and thunderings, and an earthquake, and great hail. The sounding of the seventh trumpet includes all that happens down to chapter 20-3. When it sounded, John heard great voices in heaven saying, The kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. This is the announcement that the time had come for Christ to take the kingdom, though the kingdom does not fully come into his possession for 3.5 years. The whole of this passage is anticipated, for the sayings of the 24 elders look forward to the resurrections and judgments of chapter 20. The scene is located in heaven, for it is there that John hears the trumpet sound, and sees the temple of God opened, and hears the voices and thunderings that accompany the devastation of the earth by earthquake and hail. This announcement is preliminary to the great events that are to follow, which will be the most remarkable and momentous that have ever happened on this earth. The third woe includes the vials and all other judgments down to chapter 20-3. The time limit of the seventh trumpet is given in chapter 10-7, and is spoken of as the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, implying that the blast or blasts of the seventh trumpet shall be long continued, that is, extend over the whole of the last half of the week. The middle of the week. The 7 personages, the sun-clothed woman, Rev. 12:1-2, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars, and she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. In the middle of the week, 2 wonders will appear in heaven, for John is back again in heaven. The Revised Version calls them signs, that is, they are symbols of something, and must be thus interpreted. The first will be a sun-clothed woman. Who does this sun-clothed woman represent? Some would have us believe that this woman is the Virgin Mary, others that she represents the Church. Those who say she represents the Church claim that she represents the visible or outward Church, and her child represents the true Church, or those who are to be caught out at the rapture. If this be true, and the child is not caught out until the middle of the week, then the Church will have to go halfway through the tribulation. The fact is, the woman is neither the Virgin Mary or the Church. She is Israel. We have only to be reminded of Joseph's dream, where he says, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and, behold, the sun, and the moon, and the 11 stars made obeisance to me, General 37-9, to see the Jewish character of this woman. Joseph was the 12th star. Israel is again and again compared to a woman and a married woman in the Old Testament. Isa 54-1. And in the period of her rejection she is spoken of as a widow, Isa. 47, 7-9. Luke chapter 18 verses 1-8, and a divorced woman, Isa, 50-1, and an adulterous wife, Jair. 3. 1-25, Hosea chapter 2 verses 1-23. But the church is a virgin, and an espoused virgin at that. 2. Cor, 11-2. EPH, 5, 25-27. The sun-clothed woman is described as being with child, and travailing to bring forth. When was the church in such a condition? To be found in such a condition would unfit her to be the bride of Christ. Nowhere in the Scriptures is it intimated that the church is ever to be a mother. But it is so prophesied of Israel. Speaking of the sevenfold privilege of Israel, Paul says, "Who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption, and the glory, and the covenants, and the giving of the law, and the service of God, and the promises, whose are the fathers, and of whom as concerning the flesh Christ came." Rom. 9, 4-5. Here we see that Christ was to come from Israel. Then we know that the promised seed was to come through Israel, and the prophet Isaiah looked forward to the time when Israel could say, "Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given." Isa 9, 6-7. Before the promised heir could be born, Israel had to pass through many sore afflictions and judgments. These were her travail time. There can be no question but what the sun-clothed woman represents Israel. 2. The dragon, Rev. 12, 3-4. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. The second wonder that will appear in heaven will be a great red dragon. We are not left in doubt as to who is meant, for in verse 9 he is called that old serpent, the devil, and Satan. His color is red, the color of blood, for he was a murderer from the beginning. John chapter 8 verse 44. He has 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his heads are 7 crowns. These are the emblems of the universality of his earthly dominion, and typify the sevenfold perfection of his power. For he is the prince of the powers of the air, and the prince of this world. EPH 6:12. John chapter 12 verses 31, 14, 30, 16, 11. As such, Jesus did not dispute his claim when in the wilderness temptation he offered him the kingdoms of this world and the glory of them. Luke chapter 4 verses 5-7. His 7 heads, 10 horns, and crowns associate him with the beast out of the sea, of the first verse of the next chapter, the only difference being that the dragon's crowns are on his heads, while those of the beast are on his horns, and therefore differ in number. These features, common to both, reveal the fact that there is some relation between the dragon and the beast, and that the beast is an earthly embodiment or incarnation of the dragon, for the beast does not appear on the earth until after the dragon is cast out of heaven. Though the Antichrist exists from the beginning of the week, he does not become the beast until in the middle of the week. Satan is cast out of heaven and incarnates himself in him. Then the Antichrist breaks his covenant with Israel, desecrates the temple, and becomes the satanic person that rules during the last half of the week. The stars of heaven, attached to his tail, reveal the fact that Satan will take with him in his expulsion from heaven a third of the angels, for the angels are spoken of as stars in the Old Testament. Job chapter 38 verse 7. These angels will be cast with him into the earth. They will not be visible, but they will secretly sow the seeds of rebellion, and ultimately they will be cast with Satan into the lake of fire, which will be prepared for them. Matt 25-41. While we are not told that Satan's angels are cast bound with him into the bottomless pit, yet the inference is that they are, for during the millennium they do not appear to be present on the earth. John tells us that the dragon stood before the sun-clothed woman, ready to devour her child as soon as it was born. It is intensely interesting reading to trace in the scriptures the story of Satan's efforts to prevent the birth of the man-child, Christ, and then after his birth to destroy him before he could reach the cross and purchase man's redemption. As soon as Satan had accomplished the fall of Adam and Eve, he found himself under the curse of God, and was told that the seed of the woman should bruise his head. General 3:14-15. This aroused the enmity of Satan, and he determined to prevent the birth of the promised seed, or, if that were not possible, to destroy the seed after birth. So as soon as Abel was born, from whom the promised seed was to come, Satan schemed for his destruction, and finally got his brother Cain to kill him. Then the sons of God, angels, doubtless at Satan's instigation, married the daughters of men, Kenites, and their sin, and the character of their offspring moved God to destroy mankind from off the earth. This was what Satan planned for, and would have been a victory for Satan and a defeat for God, so God decided to spare the race, and begin over again with a representative man, Noah. But it was not long before Noah planted a vineyard and drank himself drunk with the wine therefrom, the result the curse of Canaan the son of Ham, General 9:18-27. Then the people began to multiply, and Satan filled their heart with pride and presumption, and they rose and built the Tower of Babel, the result the confusion of tongues, and the unity of the race broken up. General 11:1-9. Then the Lord called Abraham, and the fight narrowed down to his seed. Abraham was 75 years old, and had no children, and Sarah his wife was 65 years of age and barren. General 16:1. Doubtless Satan laughed at the situation because of Sarah's barrenness, in which probably he had a hand, but to show Satan that he could work a miracle if necessary, to produce the promised seed, God waited until Sarah was past age, until she was 90 years old, General 17:17, and then he caused her to conceive and bear the promised seed. General 18:9-15, 21:1-3. When Isaac was about 12 years of age, Satan moved God to test Abraham by commanding him to offer up Isaac as a sacrifice upon Mount Moriah. It was similar to the test of Job. Job chapter 1 verses 6-12, 2:3-6. The plan for Isaac's destruction failed, for when God saw that Abraham was willing and ready to slay his son, he intervened and spared his life. When Isaac grew up and married Rebekah, Satan, to prevent her having offspring, caused her to be barren, but Isaac prayed and God heard his prayer, General 25:20-21, and twins were born. Then Satan, when they had grown up, stirred up enmity between them, hoping that the tragedy of Cain and Abel would be repeated, and Jacob, through whom Christ was to come, would be slain. When the time came for Moses to be born, Satan put it into the heart of Pharaoh to order that all male Hebrew children should be destroyed at birth, his purpose being to destroy the male line of descent altogether. But his plan was frustrated by a baby's tear. X 2:5-10. And so it went on, until at the death of King Jehoshaphat, his son Jehoram slew all his brethren with the sword. 2 Chron. 21:13, thus reducing the seed royal down to one life. But Jehoram had children. Then the Arabians slew all his children but one, Ahaziah the youngest. 2 Chron. 21:17, margin. 2 Chron. 22:1. But Ahaziah had children. These in turn were slain by Athaliah his mother, doubtless at the instigation of Satan. She thought she had slain them all, but God interposed and rescued the infant son at the hands of his aunt, who hid him in the temple. 2 Cor. 22:10-12, and for 6 years all the hopes of God's people as to the promised seed rested on that infant's life. During the captivity, Satan tried to destroy the whole Hebrew nation at the hands of Haman, but a very little thing, a king's sleepless night, frustrated that plan. Esther chapter 3 verses 8-15, 6:1-11. But the story is too long. At last the promised seed was born. Then Satan, failing to prevent his birth, determined to destroy him before he could reach the cross. To that end he prompted Herod, through jealousy and fear, to slay all the male children at Bethlehem under 2 years of age. But Joseph, warned of God in a dream, had fled with the infant Christ to Egypt. When Christ entered on his ministry, Satan met him in the wilderness and suggested that he throw himself from the pinnacle of the temple. Foiled in that, Satan sought Christ's life by getting his own townspeople to attempt to cast him over a precipice. Luke chapter 4 verse 29. The 2 storms on the Sea of Galilee were but attempts of Satan to destroy Christ. You cannot rebuke a thing, you can only rebuke a person, and when Christ rebuked the winds and the sea, he rebuked the person, Satan, who had caused their disturbance. Matt 8:24-27. Then Satan renewed the fight through priests and Pharisees until he succeeded at last in getting one of Christ's own disciples, Judas, to sell his master. Then amid the shades of Gethsemane, through physical exhaustion, he sought to kill Christ. And when he at last succeeded in having Christ crucified, through the agency of Pilate, he thought he had conquered, but to be doubly sure he took good care to have the place of burial sealed and guarded. But when Christ rose from the dead, Satan's rage knew no bounds. In all probability, Satan and his angels contested the ascension of Christ, for only thus can we account for the necessity of his going up 10 days before Pentecost, that he might have ample time, convoyed by 12 legions of angels, for any battle of the clouds that Satan might attempt. The history of the Christian Church is but one long story of the irrepressible conflict between Satan and God's people. Paul, writing to the Thessalonians, said, "We would have come unto you, even I Paul, once and again, but Satan hindered us." 1 Thess 2:18. And now as the time draws nigh for Christ to receive the kingdom, which means that he will come back to the earth, and that Satan's power and dominion over the earth shall cease, and Satan be bound for 1,000 years, Satan filled with wrath will oppose his return with his armies, and there will be war in Heaven. 3. The man-child Rev. 12:5-6. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. As the result of her travail, the sun-clothed woman brought forth a man-child, who was to rule the nations with a rod of iron. There can be no question as to who is meant by the man-child. He is Christ. The second psalm settles that, "Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel." The man-child cannot be the church, as some claim, because the man-child is caught up to the Father's throne, where he is now seated, while the church, which is not as yet caught up, is to be caught up to Christ in the air. 1 Thess 4:17. Those who claim that Christ and the church together constitute the man-child, because in the message to the church at Thyatira, the promise to the overcomers is that they shall rule the nations with a rod of iron, forget that this promise is not to the church as a whole, but only to the overcomers of the Thyatiran church period, AD 606-1520. In other words, the overcomers of the Thyatiran church period shall hold some prominent ruling power with Christ in the millennial kingdom. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Here is where many interpreters of this chapter have been led astray. They have supposed that the woman flees into the wilderness immediately after the birth of her child, and because the time of her flight is in the middle of the week, for the 1260 days of her preservation in the wilderness corresponds with the last half of the week, they cannot see how her child can be Christ, for Christ was born and caught up to his Father's throne centuries ago, while this event is still future. But they overlook the fact that between the 5th and 6th verses of this chapter the present church period comes in. Between these verses, the gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel's 70 weeks is found. The 5th verse describes the birth of Christ and his ascension, and then John jumps over the gap and describes in the 6th verse the flight of the woman Israel into the wilderness to escape from the Antichrist. The reason for this is that John is not dealing here with the church, and having introduced the woman and her child, to account for the dragon's wrath against her because he did not succeed in destroying her child, Christ, when he was born, John jumps over the gap, that he may again take up God's dealing with Israel. The flight of the woman is mentioned here by anticipation, for she does not flee until after the war in heaven. Here is evidence that the sun-clothed woman is not the Virgin Mary, for she does not flee into Egypt, as Joseph and the Virgin did, Matt 2:12-15, but into the wilderness. Neither does she flee with her child, for it was taken away from her and caught up to the throne of God. Neither does she flee for her child's protection, but for her own safety. From this passage we learn that Christ's millennial rule will be autocratic, for he shall rule over the nations with a rod of iron. This does not signify that his rule will be tyrannical. It simply means that his will shall be supreme. We cannot imagine Christ's rule to be other than a rule of love. Politics will have no place in the government, the masses will not be oppressed by those in power, equal rights will be accorded to everyone, and every man shall sit under his own vine and fig tree. 4. The Archangel. War in heaven, Rev. 12:7-12. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil, and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation, and strength, and the kingdom of God, and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him, the dragon, by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony. And they loved not their lives unto the death, martyr's death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea! For the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. 3.5 years. The war in heaven is started by the attempt to expel the dragon and his angels from the heavenlies. That the dragon, Satan, and his angels were not cast out of heaven at the time of his rebellion, which antedates the present earth, and confined in some prison house, is clear, for he was at liberty to visit the Garden of Eden and tempt Adam and Eve, and he had access to God in heaven in the days of Job, 2,000 years before Christ. Job chapter 1 verse 1, 2-8. And he was free to visit the earth in Christ's day and tempt him in the wilderness, and later to sift Peter. His origin is more or less shrouded in mystery, but one thing is certain, he is a created being, and that of the most exalted type. He was before his rebellion, the anointed cherub that covereth. That is, he was the guardian or protector of the throne of God. He was perfect in all his ways from the day that he was created until iniquity was found in him. In him was the fullness of wisdom, and the perfection of beauty, but it was his beauty that caused the pride. 1 Tim 3-6, that was his downfall. He was clothed in a garment that was covered with the most rare and precious gems, the sardius, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, carbuncle, all woven in with gold. He dwelt in Eden, the garden of God. This probably refers not to the earthly Eden, but to the paradise of God, on high, for Satan dwelt on the holy mount of God. All this we learn from Ezek 28:11-19, where the prophet has a foreview of the Antichrist under the title of the King of Tyrus, and as Antichrist when he becomes the beast, is to be an incarnation of Satan. The prophet here describes Satan's original glory from which he fell, for there has never as yet been such a king of Tyrus as here described. The cause of Satan's rebellion, or fall, is given in Isa 14:12-20. He is there called Lucifer, son of the morning. This was his glorious title when he was created, and this world of ours was made, at which time the morning stars, probably other glorious created ruling beings like himself, sang together, and all the sons of God, angels, shouted for joy. Job chapter 38 verse 7. It is well to note that the one here called Lucifer is in verse 4, Isa 14-4, also called the king of Babylon. As there never has been a king of Babylon like the one here described, the description must be that of a future king of Babylon. And as Antichrist is to have for his capital city Babylon rebuilt, this is probably a foreview by the prophet of Antichrist as indwelt by Lucifer, Satan, in that day when he shall be king of Babylon, and also king of Tyrus. The common notion is that Satan and his angels are imprisoned in hell. This is not true. The angels described in 2 Pet 2-4 and Jude chapter 6 as having left their first estate and being reserved in everlasting chains under darkness are not Satan's angels. They are a special class of angels, spoken of as sons of God, whose sin of marrying the daughters of men caused the flood. General 6-1-8. They are the spirits in prison, of whom Peter speaks in 1 Pet 3:18-20. They are now confined in Tartarus, awaiting the great white throne judgment. Jude chapter 6. As this book of Revelation that we are now studying is a prophecy of things to come, that were future in the Apostle John's day, and it declares that Satan was still in the heavenlies at that time, AD 96, as he has not been cast out since he must still be there. He is a great celestial potentate. He is the prince of the powers of the air, EPH 2-2, and the God of this world. 2 Cor 4-4. He is the God, not of the earth, for that belongs to its maker God. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. He is the God of the world systems of the habitable earth. These world systems embrace business, society, politics, and religion. He is the ruler of the powers of darkness, of the spirit world, EPH 6:11-12, and his position is so exalted that even Michael the archangel dare not insult him. Jude chapter 9. So mighty is he that man cannot successfully resist him without divine help. Satan is a king and has a kingdom. Of it Christ said, "If Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then shall his kingdom stand?" Matt 12:24-30. Speaking of the evil powers, Paul wrote, "We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, age, against spiritual wickedness in high places, the heavenlies." EPH 6:12. From this we see that Satan's kingdom consists of principalities, powers, age rulers of darkness, and wicked spirits in the heavenlies. These principalities are ruled by princes who control the nations of the earth, as in the days of Daniel the prophet, when a heavenly messenger was sent to Daniel, but was hindered 3 weeks from reaching him by the prince of the kingdom of Persia, Satan's ruling prince of Persia, until Michael the archangel came to his rescue. Dan 10:10-14. The opposing commanders-in-chief of the war in heaven will be Michael and the dragon, Satan. We are first introduced to Michael in the book of Daniel, and his appearance here is a confirmation that this part of the book of Revelation is Jewish, and a continuation or supplement to the book of Daniel. Michael is called in the book of Daniel one of the chief princes, Dan 10:13, your prince, Dan 10:21, and the great prince which standeth for thy people, Dan 12-1. That is, Michael has been chosen from among the chief princes that stand before God to be the protector of Daniel's people, the Jews. In Jude chapter 9 he is called the archangel, and as there is but one archangel spoken of in the Bible, Michael must be he. He also has something to do with the resurrection of the dead, for he is associated with the resurrection mentioned in Dan 12:1-2, and he contested with the devil the resurrection of Moses, Jude chapter 9, and the voice of the archangel that will be heard when the dead in Christ shall rise, 1 Thess 4:16, will be the voice of Michael. When the dragon is cast out of the heavenlies, there will be great rejoicing in heaven, because the accuser of Christ's brethren, the Jews, is cast down, but there will be woe for the inhabitants of the earth, for the dragon will be filled with great wrath, because he knows that he will have but a short time, 3.5 years, to vent his wrath on the inhabitants of the earth before he is chained and cast into the bottomless pit. While Satan has been the accuser of the brethren in all ages, the context shows that reference is here made to the Jewish remnant, the brethren of Christ, who during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation period pass through great persecution and die as martyrs. They are referred to in Rev. 6:9-11 as the souls of them that were slain for the word of God, and we are here told, Rev. 12:11, that they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and died as martyrs, for they loved not their lives unto the death. As they overcame by the blood of the Lamb, then the time of their overcoming must be subsequent to the shedding of Christ's blood on Calvary. That is, Satan, according to this account, could not have been cast out of the heavenlies prior to the crucifixion of Christ. When Jesus said, "I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven," Luke chapter 10 verse 18, he was not referring to some past fall of Satan, but it was a prophetic utterance, by way of anticipation, of his future fall, when he shall be hurled headfirst out of heaven by Michael the archangel. As further evidence as to the time of Satan's casting out, Daniel the prophet tells us that it will be at the time of trouble that is to come upon Daniel's people, the Jews, and that time of trouble is the Great Tribulation. At that time Michael shall stand up to deliver Daniel's people, and the result will be war in heaven, and Daniel's people shall be delivered, not from the Great Tribulation, but out of it. When the dragon and all the principalities and powers of evil that now occupy the middle heaven of the heavenlies, that is, the heaven between the atmosphere of our earth and the third heaven, where God dwells, are cast out and down, then the heavens will be clean, for they are not now clean in God's sight. Job chapter 15 verse 15. And as all these evil powers will doubtless be imprisoned during the millennium, with Satan, the heavens will be clean during that period, and this will account for the universal rule of righteousness and peace of those days. Rev. 12:13-16. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman, which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, 3.5 years, from the face of the serpent, the dragon. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth, and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. When the dragon is cast out of heaven into the earth, knowing that his defeat has been brought about by the elevation of the man-child to the place of power, he will concentrate his hatred and malice on the sun-clothed woman, Israel, who gave the man-child birth. To the woman will be given the wings of a great eagle, that she may fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she shall be nourished for a time, times and half a time, or 3.5 years. This takes us back to the flight of Israel from Egypt, of which God said, "Ye have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bare you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself." Ex. 19-4. As the woman and the dragon are symbols, so are the eagle's wings. They speak of the rapid and safe flight of the woman, Israel, into the wilderness, where she shall be safely kept and nourished for 3.5 years until the dragon is bound. The prophet Isaiah speaks of this time when he says, "Come, my people, Israel, enter thou into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. Hide thyself as it were for a little while, 3.5 years. Until the indignation, the great tribulation, is overpast. In that day, the day of the casting out of the dragon, the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the dragon, or serpent, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, the crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. Isa 26-20, 27-1. This may mean the beast that comes up out of the sea, the Antichrist. Rev. 13, 1-2. This is the time that Christ refers to in Matt 24, 15-22. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, Dan 9:27, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect Sake, the elect of Israel, those days shall be shortened. The flight that Matthew here speaks about is not the same flight that Luke speaks about. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter the reinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck, in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Luke chapter 21 verses 20-24. A careful comparison of these two passages will reveal their difference. Luke refers to the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus, AD 70, at which time Jerusalem was compassed by the Roman army, and the sufferings of the inhabitants of the city were so great that mothers cooked and ate their own children. This is past. And verse 24 has been fulfilled, for the Jews have been led away captive into all nations, where they still remain, and Jerusalem has since then been trodden down of the Gentiles, and will continue to be until the times of the Gentiles shall be fulfilled. But the flight that Matthew speaks about is still future. He locates it at the time of the Great Tribulation, which he says is to be preceded by the setting up of the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. The gods, or idols of the heathen, are spoken of as abominations. Milcom, or Molech, was the abomination of the Ammonites. Chemosh, the abomination of Moab. 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 5-7. This interprets the abomination, spoken of by Daniel, as nothing other than an idol, or false god. In the middle of the week, a desolator, Antichrist, will appear and cause the sacrifices and oblations to cease, and set up in the holy place of the temple an idol, and that idol will be an image of the beast. Reverend 13, 14-15. Let us now return to the flight of the woman, and see if we can locate her place, the chamber, to which she is to flee, and shut to the door, and hide herself for a little while, and be nourished by God for a time, and times, and half a time, or 3.5 years. The cities of refuge. The cities of refuge of Old Testament times are a type of this wilderness refuge of the children of Israel. The cities of refuge were designated cities, 3 on each side the river Jordan, where the manslayer could flee for safety from the avenger of blood. If it was proved after trial that he had slain a man willfully, he was turned over to the avenger of blood, but if he did it unwittingly, his life was spared, but he had to remain in the city until the death of the high priest. If there were no manslayer, there would be no avenger of blood, and therefore no need for a city of refuge. Now if I find in the New Testament that a certain class of people are called upon to flee to a place of refuge for the protection of their lives, then I must believe that they flee because an avenger of blood is after them, and that they flee because they are guilty of manslaughter. Such a class of people I find in the Jewish race. They were the cause of the death of Christ, and though he was crucified by the Roman authorities, they assumed the guilt, for they cried, "His blood be on us and on our children." Matt 27-25. At first sight it looks like willful murder, yet from the prayer of Jesus on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," it is clear that Jesus' death was not so much a premeditated murder as it was a murder committed in a blind religious frenzy. Paul says, had they known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. 1 Cor. 2-8. It is clear then that the Jewish race is only guilty of manslaughter. As the manslayer of Jesus, they have been for over 1800 years running for a city of refuge, and have not as yet reached it. The avenger of blood has been on their track and has hounded them from nation to nation, and the epithet of the wandering Jew has followed them down the centuries, and the prophecy of Moses is being fulfilled that they should find no rest for the sole of their foot. Deut. 28:64-67. If the Jews are the manslayer, who is the avenger of blood? Antichrist. And now as to the city of refuge, that God will provide for Israel when the avenger of blood, Antichrist, who shall then be indwelt by the dragon, is on her track. When the Lord God brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, they journeyed from the Red Sea, tarrying for a while at Mount Sinai to receive the law and build the tabernacle, until they came, 1 year after leaving Egypt, to Kadesh Barnea. There they sent up spies to spy out the land of Canaan, but refused to go up and take possession of the land, and were compelled to wander in the wilderness south of the Dead Sea. There God took care of them and fed them for 40 years. Now it is in the same wilderness that God is going to provide for them a place of refuge, in the day when the avenger of blood shall seek to destroy them. Speaking of the Antichrist, the prophet Daniel says, "He shall enter also into the glorious land, Palestine, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon." Dan. 11:41. Now Edom takes in the wilderness where Israel wandered for 40 years. And it is here in Edom that the city of refuge that God has provided for Israel is located, and is known today as Petra. It was a great commercial center in the days of King Solomon. In AD 105, the Romans conquered the country and called the province Arabia Petra. When the power of Rome waned, Petra gradually fell into the hands of the Arabs and became completely lost to the civilized world in the 7th century, and remained so until it was rediscovered by Burckhardt in 1812. It is located in the mountains like as in the crater of a volcano. It has but one entrance, and that is through a narrow, winding defile or canyon from 12 to 40 feet wide, the sides of which are precipitous and at times so close together as to almost shut out the blue sky above and make you think you are passing through a subterranean passageway. The height of the sides varies from 200 to 1,000 feet, and the length of the canyon is about 2 miles. No other city in the world has such a wonderful gateway. The sides of the canyon are lined with wonderful monuments and temples carved out of the rocky sandstone of the sides. Once inside the rocky enclosure of the city, we find the ruins of magnificent buildings, tombs, and monuments. The cliffs that surround the city are carved and honeycombed with excavations to a height of 300 feet above the floor of the valley, and the excavations cut as they are out of different colored strata of the rock, such as red, purple, blue, black, white, and yellow, lend a beauty to their appearance that is indescribable and overpowering to the beholder. When the time comes for the manslayer, Israel, to escape from the hands of the avenger of blood, Antichrist, the rocky fastness of the ancient city of Petra will be her city of refuge. We read that when the woman, Israel, shall flee into the wilderness, that the serpent, Antichrist, indwelt by Satan, shall cast a flood of water out of his mouth after her to destroy her, but that the earth shall open her mouth and swallow the flood. That is, Antichrist will send his army after the fleeing Israelites, and it will probably be swallowed up in a sandstorm of the desert, and Israel shall safely reach her place of refuge, where she shall be safe, not until the death of the high priest, but until the return of the high priest, Jesus, from heaven, who as king priest of the armies of heaven will deliver her and allow her to leave her place of refuge. During the period of Israel's hiding in the wilderness, God will nourish her as he did during her 40 years wandering in the same wilderness in the days of Moses. 5. The Jewish remnant, Rev. 12:17. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Baffled in his attempt to destroy the woman, the dragon, in his rage will make war against the remnant of her seed, that is, against those Israelites left in Palestine or among the nations that keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. To this end he will give to the beast, Antichrist, his power, and his seat, and great authority. Reverend 13-2. Here again we have indirect evidence that the woman is not the church but Israel. When the church is caught out, no remnant is left behind. All that are in Christ are taken away. But when the woman, Israel, flees into the wilderness, a remnant is left behind. This remnant is composed of two classes. First, those who keep the commandments of God, that is, Orthodox Jews who observe the Old Testament law, and second, those who accept the testimony of Jesus Christ, that is, accept Jesus as their promised Messiah. The latter class will be converted by the preaching of the gospel of the kingdom, by the two witnesses. Those will be trying times for those Israelites who will not commit idolatry by bowing the knee to the image of the beast, for it will be a remorseless war of persecution that Antichrist will wage against them, and thousands will die a martyr's death. 6. The beast out of the sea, the incarnation of the dragon, the anti-God, in the beast, or Antichrist. Reverend 13, 1-10. And I, he, the dragon, RV, stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds, and tongues, and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life, of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. John next saw the dragon, standing on the seashore, and as he stood, a beast rose up out of the sea, having 7 heads, and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the body of the beast was like a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, throne, and great authority. This does not necessarily mean that the dragon gave him his own throne, but he gave him power, and a throne, and great authority. As John was back on the Isle of Patmos, the sea from which he saw the beast arise was probably the Mediterranean, though the sea in prophecy signifies the nations. What does this composite beast signify? This is not the first time we have read in the scriptures of a beast coming up out of the sea, so we must go back to the book of Daniel for an explanation. While Daniel was a statesman and did not hold the prophetic office, he had the prophetic gift, and was not only an interpreter of dreams, but a prophet, and to him was revealed the whole course of the times of the Gentiles, and the character of its last great leader, the Antichrist. His prophecy is mainly concerned with the things that shall befall his people, the Jews, in the latter days, Dan 10:14, and as we are now dealing with the things that shall come to pass in the last, or 70th week, of Daniel's 70 weeks, we necessarily must turn back to the book of Daniel for an explanation of this symbol of the beast. But before we take that up, it is important to note that both the Old and New Testaments speak of a mysterious and terrible personage, who shall be revealed in the last times. He is called by various names. In the Old Testament, the Assyrian, Isaiah chapter 10 verses 5 to 6, 30, 27 to 33, King of Babylon. Isaiah chapter 14 verse 4, Lucifer. Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12, the little horn. Daniel chapter 7 verse 8, 9 to 12, a king of fierce countenance. Dan 8:23, the prince that shall come. Dan 9:26, the willful king. Dan 11:36. In the New Testament, the man of sin. 2 Thess 2, 3 to 8, son of perdition. 2 Thess 2, 3 to 8, that wicked. 2 Thess 2, 3 to 8, Antichrist. 1 John chapter 2 verse 18, the beast. Reverend 13, 1 to 2. Jesus also made a prophetic reference to him. I am come in my Father's name, and ye receive me not. If another shall come in his own name, him ye will receive. John chapter 5 verse 43.